Our next speaker. All right, everyone. Once an evangelical minister, our next speaker, Dan Barker, underwent a radical evolution thought, as it were, and is now co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Dan is also a prolific debater who has crossed swords with some of the most impressive theologians and religious apologists of his time, including Dinesh D'Souza, who he spanked at Harvard, and I recommend you take him up and have the opportunity to watch him humiliate someone again. He's also the author of 2 books, Losing Faith in Faith and Godless. So now, let me present Dan Barker.
Thank you, John. It's kind of strange because I get to go visit a lot of the campuses and seeing all you in context. Now coming here and seeing the faces in a different place, it's like, is this a community or what is this? This is wonderful. Free thought and atheism, I hesitate to call it a movement because a movement needs followers. And there's no followers in this room, right? We're all leaders, we're all thinkers, and as soon as somebody stood up and said, we're going to have like a atheist deacon or bishop or something, right? You would all leave, right? We don't want that. We don't have any of this kind of, like in most religions you have a kind of privileged hierarchy of the leaders and the popes and the bishops, but we have none of that. We're all just, like Richard Dawkins said, he repeated that old joke that organizing atheists is like trying to herd cats. And he said, that's true, but if you get enough cats together, they can make an awful lot of noise. So I think that's what we're doing. I spent 19 years preaching the gospel, and I loved it. I've since then spent 25 years doing what I call reverse penance. And I think my non-soul has finally been cleansed. I don't know, you can maybe tell me. In fact, I got to be... where's Jason? I got to actually perform a wedding at that Air Force Academy chapel. Because I'm an ordained minister, I have an ordination. Well, Jeff Lauder was getting married. He was an officer there at the Air Force Academy. So all I had to do was submit my ordination to the chaplain at the Air Force Academy. And he okayed me to come in and perform this wedding. I think it was the first ever free thought, non-theistic wedding ever performed in that Protestant chapel. And her family were believers, and his family were all atheists and agnostics. Boy, what a wedding we put on there. We tried to strip the place of everything religious except for that huge aluminum cross hanging down. Looks like a sword. Have you ever been in there? It's just this, you know. But in any event, that was part of my reverse penance. One thing you guys could help me do with the Freedom from Religion Foundation is I need jokes. We have a national radio show called Free Thought Radio, and some of you listen to it either on Air America, which is broadcast around the nation on Saturdays on weekends, or on the podcast. And we're doing like our 172nd show now, and I real quick ran out of my 20, 30 best free thought jokes. So if you know any new ones, let me know, because I want to... Somebody sent me one last week. Man goes in a confessional, and he looks around and he sees, wow, there's this fully stocked bar on this side, with Guinness on tap, and what? And over here are all these expensive Cuban cigars. And he goes in and he says, Father, forgive me, it's been a long time since my last confession. And by the way, the confessional is a lot more inviting than it used to be. And the priest said, get out of here, you're on my side. I might tell that on the next show. You can look on page 46 of your handout to see some of the things the Freedom from Religion Foundation is doing. We take legal actions. We've had more than 40 lawsuits challenging violations of the separation of state and church. Some of the current ones we have now, we are challenging the National Day of Prayer. And by the way, in that lawsuit, for the very first time in more than 30 years of taking legal action, we've been hit with discovery. Usually, we're the ones hitting discovery. We're asking these governments to provide all their documents. Well, on this National Day of Prayer lawsuit, the Obama administration is now asking us to provide discovery, and they have every right to do that. And our attorney told us, even though it's quite an onerous task, it could have been worse, but they want all these documents, every single court case, all the money we've spent on everybody we've ever talked to or emailed about the issue. It just piles and piles of documents, which is keeping our office pretty busy, but it's actually kind of fun going back through all the records and seeing some of the lawsuits. We won most of our lawsuits challenging violations of state church separation, and the ones we haven't won, we should have. A nativity scene that stood alone in a Wanakee City Park. The judge said that can stay there because the nativity scene is not religious. We appealed to the state Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, upheld that decision, saying the majority has rights too. Can you believe that? And our plaintiffs chickened out and didn't want to go to the Supreme Court on that one. But we should have won that. It was, on paper it was a slam dunk, but when you get before these judges, especially when you get before now a U.S. Supreme Court that has not 5 Roman Catholics, but 6 Roman Catholics. Is that a religious test for public office? To be a Roman Catholic? When we took our case in 2007, the Hein versus Freedom from Religion Foundation, we didn't want to go to the Supreme Court. We were winning. But the question of standing came up. We were denied access on standing, and we won at this appeals level. Judge Posner wrote a wonderful decision at the appeals level upholding our right to challenge George Bush's establishing of a faith-based office in the White House. But the government didn't like that. They petitioned and basically went to court, and we lost that. Although all the groups were on our side. American Atheists wrote a real good brief. CFI wrote a good brief. ACLU, Americans United, all the major newspapers editorialized in our favor. And yet we were before that newly appointed court. In fact, it was Judge Alito's first religion case. And we lost, not on the merits. In fact, one of the justices said what George Bush was doing might very well be unconstitutional, but you just can't get at it that way. We lost on standing. And in fact, that loss was a hard loss for all of us, because what it did was it raises the bar to getting into court. So now we're noticing the Obama administration, as much as many of us love Obama, he still seems to be he could have discontinued the faith-based initiative, but he's actually pledged to continue it, and even he said he would expand it. So we still have a lot of battles to fight on the state church grounds. We're also in court challenging the engraving of In God We Trust in the visitor center. And as soon as they passed that law on July the 9th, we sued like 3 or 4 days later. We went immediately to try to enjoin them, the architect, from putting that up there. So you may have seen in the media, in the news, on Fox News or on some of these stations. We're challenging nativity scenes. We have a case in South Carolina. Andrew, you're not in South Carolina anymore though, right? But you're going back there.
I get a school there.
Andrew was on Free Thought Radio, by the way, talking about his great efforts. And in South Carolina, they are giving high school credit for religious release time education. So high schoolers who go off campus, they actually can get a grade for that. So we're challenging that. That seems to be crossing the line. We have a case in Colorado where they're promoting church attendance as one of the 40 developmental assets to being a good, successful student. We're challenging that. We're just saying take that one out. We're not against developmental assets. We're just saying take that out. But the school board, and this religious group that's behind this thing is fighting back. So and we like cases like that. We like, it's a good way to be in the news. It's a good way to fight. It's a good way to promote a secular government, which we all think is important. The best hope for the world is a government that's secular. Secular doesn't necessarily mean anti-religious. We all know secular means that the government is neutral on all these grounds. And we get to do debates. We get to do outreach. And one of the favorite things I get to do, if you read my latest book, Godless, I make a point in there of talking about you guys. And one of the highest points of my life is after the debate. After all of that is done, then we go out for pizza with John or with Andrew or with Jan or with whoever else out here, and just talk and hang out with this leading-edge movement. And I never hesitate to tell people in speeches that I give that the current generation of young people is the least religious in a very long time, if ever. I don't know if there were any polls done at the founding of our country. Church attendance was pretty low back then. So maybe the young generation back then, but at least in a century, we are now facing, you guys are now seeing much more openness for free thought, for secularism, for state church separation.